Lex Luger killed Miss Elizabeth. Yeah, didn't he beat the shit out that bitch?
Miss Elizabeth presided over the WWF as the first lady of wrestling. Her elegant aesthetic and classic love story with the macho man Randy Savage made her one of the most popular women in all of wrestling. 1 month before her death, Lex Luger was arrested for giving Miss Elizabeth 2 black eyes and a busted lip. This is where the
That's fucking crazy.
conspiracy theory that Lex Luger murdered Miss Elizabeth comes from.
I don't think he cold-blooded like I'm gonna kill this bitch and then did it. It wasn't like a Benoit case where it was a first degree where he like was like, yeah, I'm doing this shit and then did it and like thought about it. What the fuck did you just put? I just shaved my ball sack. Shit so smooth you could swallow them. They'd come out the other end looking the same. What the fuck? What the fuck was I saying? What was I saying? I was saying, alright, I don't think with Luger, I don't think it was a first degree case where he's like, I'm gonna fucking kill you, bitch, and then he did it. It was probably a scuffle. And then he didn't think, I'm going to hit this bitch, and then did. I think it was
Miss
just
Elizabeth,
like some
real name
wild,
Elizabeth Hewitt,
cracked
was
out.
born in Frankfort, Kentucky, and from a young age, she had a tough upbringing. Her father left the family when she was young, and as a result, her family grew up very poor. Despite her circumstances, she was able to rise above them, graduating from the University of Kentucky with a degree in communications. While working the front desk of a gym in Kentucky in the early 1980s, Elizabeth
I would never imagine balls for another man's balls. Smooth, sweet balls. I would never.
Savage claims that it was love at first sight, though Elizabeth's friends say that she needed a little more time to become accustomed to the high energy Savage.
This guy should do a video on, Macho Man and Stephanie McMahon, because that's apparently a crazy alleged thing. If there's enough information on it. Didn't they have a Dark Side of the Ring episode about that? Not about just that. No, they had it about these two.
And would marry at Elizabeth's mother's house in Frankfort, Kentucky in 1984.
Am I retarded?
At the time, Savage was part of International Championship Wrestling, and from time to time he began to get involved with Miss Elizabeth. She was helping him out in the company. Elizabeth was primarily an announcer for ICW, but also served as an editor
They're a bit musty after a day of work, but they're...
for their televised shows. Officials at ICW...
Chat, imagine you're a lovely, beautiful woman bitch, and then you go... Vince and Sean, the conspiracy, they was touching each other. They were gay. Sean was this little gay boy, wasn't he? Who's this little gay boy? Sean, that's fucking crazy. Chat, imagine you're a beautiful woman whore bitch, and then you go on a date with a guy, and you're like slurping down his balls and shit, and he's like, yeah, bitch, eat those gobble gums. What do?
ICW were impressed at how quickly Elizabeth picked up the industry, so she became a staple of the program.
I don't believe that one. No, I don't believe that one either.
Vince McMahon was combing the territories to bring in all of their best talent, and decided to bring the Macho Man.
I just think he knew Sean brought in money.
Savage
and was like
insisted that his wife
the sexy boy type shit. He's like,
WWF officials quickly tried to find.
So he just let him do whatever he wanted.
Randy Savage then introduced his new manager, the elegant and beautiful Miss Elizabeth. Her beauty immediately.
Try to blow a bubble, see what effect it pops. You pop the fucking, you pop the gobble cum, and it's like, oh, load is 20% stronger. You get buffed.
The attention of the audience. But
imagine gobble gums that like buff you, but like in real life. Cock 1% girth increase.
The audience weren't the only ones to fall in love with Miss Elizabeth. WWF officials were immediately impressed by her too, particularly how her graceful presence was the polar opposite to the...
You ever get so clean in the shower you're rubbing your legs together like a cricket in bed afterwards? No. I do rub my legs together when it's cold as shit and I'm trying to warm up. When I'm so comfortable, I'm like,
Macho Man's intensity. This helped to humanize the wild persona that was Randy Savage to the audience. This juxtaposition was further highlighted by the fact that Elizabeth was truly one of the first female valets in the company. Despite Savage being a heel throughout his initial run, Elizabeth always continued to be a face. This enabled Savage to continue to garner heat with the fans, as he would treat the beautiful Miss Elizabeth poorly on camera to get the
Treat her like
audience to boo
shit.
him.
Punch that
Much of
bitch.
Savage's early
Hit that
stories
woman.
also
Hit
revolved
that
around
woman.
other men being
Hit
attracted
that
to
woman.
Elizabeth,
That's what Lex Luger did. Now the bitch is
George,
dead.
Animal Steel, and the
That was
million-dollar
crazy. I
man,
didn't need to say
Ted
that. Chat,
DiBiase.
I'm not the same man as I
In all
was
of these
10 seconds
rivalries,
ago.
Savage would be enraged by anyone else
that?
trying to lay their hands on his woman.
Man
This was
really became
actually
an
very
alcoholic.
reflect-
This is my second, and I'm mixing it with Sprite. And I ate before this. I'm not... It's not like...
of Savage and Elizabeth's relationship in real life. Especially in the late 1980s, the wrestlers in the locker room were known for their constant and extreme pranks, and were also known for their womanizing.
Abuse sold back
They
then.
were to protect Elizabeth from the boys.
Were there other instances where a guy was just whooping on his bitch on live TV?
Would get angry with any of the men who attempted to approach or talk to her. This protected
Hard Mountain Dew? I'll probably try that one next. Right now, the thing that I usually have is Twisted Tea. But if you after you have enough of them, you taste the alcohol more than you do the tea, and it's not that good. After you if you want to drink a little bit more.
nature from Savage also showed itself in Elizabeth's
That's
on-screen
why I
presentation.
got the Arizona
Savage
ones. Also, they
managed
were
nearly
out of
every
Twisted.
aspect of Elizabeth's character.
So I was like, all right, what's something that's yummy?
Twisted
Tea nasty as fuck. After you have enough of them, always go Mike's. Mike's Hart's not that bad. I had a couple sips of those. But yeah, with Twisted Tea, when you have 5 in 30 minutes, it's not that nice. Miller Lite, man, I was looking at what the fuck was it? There was a 12-pack of Budweiser on DoorDash that was very, very cheap, and I was actually thinking about that shit. Twisted Tea always nasty, no self-love. You have to really hate yourself to like a Twisted Tea.
That's how
crazy.
Elizabeth came to be friends with Linda Hogan, the then wife to WWF's megastar Hulk Hogan. As another
Remember
woman
when
who spent
Hulk
most
Hogan
of her time
said,
on the road with her husband, the two
Hulk
became
Hogan,
fast friends.
we coming
and
for
it gave
you!
Elizabeth
Hulk
an outlet
Hogan! That shit
for
was...
socialization away from the Savage's overprotective nature. To be clear, nobody has ever claimed that Savage and Elizabeth's relationship was poor or toxic by any means. As an actual married couple, the two were never part of the prevalent club and party scenes like many other wrestlers were at the time, which kept them away from drugs and alcohol.
When does Hector go live? I don't know. He got a face cam for his PlayStation, and he said he wants to, lock in and stream, but he just hasn't yet. I'm not fucking worried about it.
Instances or stories of abuse, and by all accounts, the two loved each other very much.
Shit.
Their most prevalent issues as a couple were ones that many who travel and spend every moment with each other have. Elizabeth was constantly managing Savage's career behind the
Tell him you'll be his man if he starts streaming regularly. I told him I'd do so many nice things to him if he streamed, and it hasn't happened.
scenes and spent most of her time preparing Savage and his equipment for the constant matches. The only real issue was Savage's overprotection, which began to wear on Elizabeth over the years. As time went on, Savage's personality and in-ring ability forced the WWF to turn him face, and his relationship with Elizabeth became even more popular with the fans.
He was
Savage went on to
overprotective
win the
as shit
WWF
over her.
title
He
with
definitely
Elizabeth
was.
by his side at WrestleMania 4, and would eventually align with Hulk Hogan in the summer of 1988 as the
For
Mega
you, nice
Powers.
person. Yeah, he
Despite
was a
the
really
top
nice
two
person,
babyfaces
Hogan.
in the
Yeah, great
company
guy.
teaming together, much of the focus remained on their manager, Miss Elizabeth, and she propelled the two to new heights. Elizabeth was also the reason for the implosion of the Mega Powers, once again being the focal point of one of the company's biggest storylines. Again, playing off of his real-life insecurities,
It is a
Savage
good
began
story,
to accuse Hogan of lusting after Miss Elizabeth. After a series of instances where the two hugged or Hogan accidentally laid his hands on her, coupled with a number of other perceived slights, the Mega Powers exploded into the main event of WrestleMania 5. Elizabeth refused to pick sides between the two men, taking a neutral corner during the bout, and after Hogan eventually took the WWF title from Savage, the Macho Man dropped Miss Elizabeth as his manager the next night, separating the two on television for the first time.
He had that other bitch that
In
wasn't as
reality,
bad, right?
Elizabeth was just burnt out from the years on the road with her husband and wanted the two of them to take some time off. Savage was at the height of his popularity though and didn't want to walk away just yet, so instead only Elizabeth took time off the road. Savage meanwhile went through a character change, now calling himself the Macho King, punctuated by his new manager, the sensational Sherry.
Yeah, it is
the
gross
intense
ass
Sherry
bitch.
was a far cry from the elegant Miss Elizabeth, and fans continually
He
pleaded
had
during
both
the
his
shows
husbands.
for the return of the First Lady of Wrestling. And by the time WrestleMania 7 rolled
No, so the thing is, it was Savage was with Elizabeth, and then he was in a team with Hulk Hogan. So it was Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan. They were both a good team, and then Miss Elizabeth was Randy Savage's wife and manager. And then, you know, Savage becomes protective of his girl, starts bickering with his mans about it. He's like, oh, you know, you're lusting over, because he's like, oh, you know, I'm close with both of you. I'm going to give my friend a hug. He's like, oh, you're touching my girls, and shit like that. She was the real wife, then a work wife with someone else. No, she was work and real wife with Randy Savage. But in general, in real life, Randy Savage was also protective of her, and they're like, oh, kind of turn this shit into a storyline a little bit. So then, you know, they start playing into it on TV, and then he's like, oh, well, now we're going to fight. You know, we're going to have Randy Savage and Hogan go after each other. We're going to have them both fight. Miss Liz was going to be like, oh, no, my husband and his friend, and I love both of them. Not in love with both of them, but like my husband that I love very much, and his mans are fighting. And I'm like, oh, no. Guys, that's kind of the gist of it.
A retirement match was made between him and the Ultimate Warrior. Before the match had started, Elizabeth was spotted in the crowd by the broadcast watching the contest. The Ultimate Warrior defeated
Love
Savage.
Triangle? Well, with Love Triangle, you would have to have multiple people loving each other. Oh, her husband wanted Hogan. Oh, yeah, you're right. It was gay all along. Yeah.
And after the match, Sherry began berating.
They fucked in the ring in WrestleMania 4.
And kicking the
main event.
Macho Man. Elizabeth then jumped the barricade.
Randy Savage versus Hulk Hogan oiled up twerk off. Shut the fuck up.
Rushing the ring and threw Sherry to the outside to protect her former client. The two embraced in the ring, and the crowd cheered and cried tears of joy. They left together and finally.
Where was I in all this? I was not around. I was under the ring.
United on screen.
I was feeling the vibrations of like the ring like moving because of all the what's it called? The inertia from the ass.
Day, Miss Elizabeth's return is one of WrestleMania's most iconic.
Someone got their back broke that night.
The Macho Man and Miss Elizabeth as the greatest love story the WWE has ever told.
And then they're fighting, bitch comes out, he hugs his bitch, and they're both cool
The
again.
duo then capitalized on their WrestleMania momentum when the Macho Man proposed to Miss Elizabeth. Ironically, despite being actually married for nearly 7 years by that point, the marriage was secret from the audience. This led to the two having one of the industry's most iconic marriage
Gotta pause between
ceremonies
single
at
frames to catch your mouth gaped open beneath the shut the fuck
1991, dubbed The Match Made in Heaven. Then it was back to business as usual, with most of Savage's storylines revolving around men interacting with Miss Elizabeth. In 1992 though, things between Elizabeth and Savage would shift forever.
Just taking bumps, I swear.
The Hogans had gone down to Miami due to Hulk filming the movie. Elizabeth, who had been feeling isolated without having Linda around to hang out with, asked Randy if she could go to Miami to spend a week with her friend. Randy agreed, and so Elizabeth arrived in Miami, but very quickly, Elizabeth began to stray from staying with her friends.
Almost gross.
After not being able to find Elizabeth before going out, Linda Hogan eventually found her hanging out with another man. Elizabeth said that she was going to be staying with him instead of the Hogans during her time in Miami. Savage, meanwhile, began to get concerned as his attempts to call Elizabeth continued to be unanswered. He eventually got through to Linda Hogan, and when she said she wasn't sure where Elizabeth was, Savage freaked out. He ended up traveling directly to Miami, telling Linda not to inform Elizabeth that he was looking for her. After a few hours, Savage and Hulk Hogan found Elizabeth, and Randy ended up taking her home. The altercation was one of the final straws in Elizabeth and Randy's relationship, and Randy and Hulk's relationship was even strained, as Savage blamed Hogan for letting Elizabeth go astray. Soon after, Miss Elizabeth packed her bags and left Randy Savage while he was on the road. She had grown tired of the overprotection and Savage's controlling nature, and decided to move back to Miami to be with the man she had met during her vacation. Elizabeth was quietly written off WWF television, with only a statement regarding their divorce from Randy Savage mentioned in WWF magazine. Miss Elizabeth was no longer mentioned in feuds or in any capacity, out of respect to Savage, who was said to have been devastated by Elizabeth leaving. Elizabeth went on to lead a quiet number of years. She retired from wrestling and in turn retired from the spotlight. She ended up meeting and dating an attorney in Miami named Carrie Lubetsky, and the two were actually married in 1997. But this wouldn't spell the end of Miss Elizabeth's career in wrestling. Randy Savage, looking to revitalize his career, jumped to WCW. At the time, WCW was giving out lucrative guaranteed contracts, with Savage in particular receiving around $1 million. Despite the two having been separated for a number of years, Savage reached out to
I shaved last night. I thought it'd be a good idea to go mustache and sideburns. Now I look like I just won the Daytona 500. I'm about to beat my wife. So you said I shaved last night, and after Gaz coming in here, I thought this message was going to be fucking insane. And I'm glad that you're going to beat your wife. I'm actually relieved that you're going to hit that bitch.
Elizabeth to come to WCW with him, as a gesture to get her one of those expensive contracts. So in January of 1996, Miss Elizabeth returned from retirement, again alongside Randy Savage, but this time in WCW. Things were different in this iteration though, as Miss Elizabeth turned heel for the first time in her career shortly after debuting. She aligned with the New World Order, and many of her early storylines again focused on her ex-husband in an inverse of the storylines they would tell in the WWF. This time, Elizabeth was the manipulative one, and she got to show off a side of her that audiences had never seen before. After taking a brief leave of absence, Elizabeth would return with a new client, and this would be her most important client since the Macho Man Randy Savage. Elizabeth began managing Lex Luger, another big-name superstar in WCW. Again, Elizabeth's mean streak would become more pronounced, actually getting physically involved in some matches and storylines to benefit her client. But the real story was the one happening behind the scenes. When Elizabeth was with Randy Savage, real life influenced art, with Savage's actual insecurities and jealousness inspiring most of their feuds and storylines. This time, the opposite was happening. As had happened countless times in professional wrestling, the art began to influence real life, as Elizabeth began to have a romantic relationship with Lex Luger. But the twist in the story was that both Elizabeth and Luger were married at the time. Elizabeth ended up separating from her husband in a move likely hastened by her new relationship with Luger, but Luger remained married to his wife throughout. To make matters even more complicated, Elizabeth moved to Georgia to be closer to Luger, and even lived in the same complex as Luger and his family. Despite reservations from many backstage, including Elizabeth's friend, Linda Hogan, most people liked Elizabeth so much that they decided that if she was happy with the relationship, then so were they, even if it did have the potential to become a messy affair. Even the Macho Man, to his credit, was never reported to have any jealousy or ill will towards Elizabeth or Luger during this time, and was actually said to have been relatively cordial and friendly with the two throughout. Elizabeth and Luger remained an on-screen act until WCW's closing in 2000, with May 29th being Miss Elizabeth's last appearance in wrestling in her career. Elizabeth and Luger stayed together after leaving WCW, with Elizabeth going full circle by working the front desk at Luger's gym in Georgia called Main Event Fitness. But things weren't all as they seemed behind the scenes for the couple. Elizabeth and Luger began to get involved with pills and alcohol. Luger had begun to use pills for pain, believing himself to be too disciplined to actually become addicted to them. Unfortunately, his belief was false, as both he and Elizabeth developed an addiction.
Being a fan? I mean, yeah, because then you have to learn about all the wild shit. And it's like,
commonly would mix them with alcohol in a dangerous combination.
How do y'all support these people?
Their addiction began a mutual spiraling that only got worse as time went on. Arguments between the two began to become more frequent as the relationship began to turn toxic. The cops were called numerous times to the townhouse the couple shared, to the point where Luger felt that he was being targeted by the Cobb County Police, as every appearance from them drew more vehicles and officers. In April of 2003, police were called to the home Luger and Elizabeth shared in response to a domestic dispute. When they arrived, they found Miss Elizabeth with 2 bruised eyes, a bump on her head, and a busted lip. Elizabeth told authorities that her injuries were a result of falling down. She told the police that she had fallen on concrete while walking their 2 large dogs, but she also told friends that she had fallen down the stairs. Eventually,
Bitch looked like Lily after she got her fucking dome bumped off a fucking tire.
She ended admitted that
Bitch,
Luger
don't you
had
ever!
Luger was
This is the
charged with
funniest shit
misdemeanor
ever, bro.
battery and was released on $2,500 bond.
That's
Only
so
2
funny.
days later, while Miss Elizabeth was in the car with Lex Luger, he was charged with a DUI after rear-ending another car. To make matters worse, Luger had a suspended license and was driving with a gun in the car. Elizabeth luckily was unharmed and she was sent home from the accident in a taxi cab. The real tragedy would take place a month later on May 1st, 2003.
He was gonna
The
fuck,
two were
oh my
spending the
god.
night taking a mix of hydrocodone and Xanax and washing them down with vodka. After heating up their dinner in the microwave, Luger called Elizabeth to come and get her food, but Elizabeth never did. He then took the food over to her on the couch, thinking that Elizabeth had just fallen asleep. He was unable to wake her up though, and when he finally noticed that Elizabeth's eyes were dilated,
The whole lifestyle, if
he
you
began
want
to
the good, you
realize
have
that
to
something
automatically
was
live in
wrong.
the bad as well. Yeah.
A panicked
getting my
Luger
head slammed?
called 911 to report that Elizabeth wasn't breathing and was instructed by the responder to begin CPR until paramedics could arrive. Luger delayed
gave her
in starting
drugs
the
and she's asleep
CPR
now,
as
help!
he was frazzled and unaware of how to even do it, but made the attempt before paramedics made it onto the scene. Luger was escorted to the front yard while the professionals tried to save Miss Elizabeth, but it was too late. Miss Elizabeth had died at the age of 42.
Fucking truly, Lamal.
The police arrived at Luger's home soon after and began to treat the townhouse as a crime scene. Luger was informed by the police that he was not yet being charged with any crime, but that they had to bring him into the station while they did their investigation. Elizabeth's body was taken in for an autopsy to see if there was any signs of foul play resulting in her death. The forensic pathologist didn't find anything, and Luger was absolved from any wrongdoing resulting in Elizabeth's death.
I
Her
swore he
cause of
beat
death
that
was
bitch.
officially listed as acute toxicity from a deadly mix of painkillers and vodka. Even though Lex was off the hook for the murder of Miss Elizabeth, he still faced some trouble. While investigating the home, police found a large stash of anabolic roids, Oxycontin, synthetic growth hormones, and more. As a result, Luger was charged with 13 counts of possession of a controlled substance and one misdemeanor count of distribution of a dangerous substance. He was arrested and he actually missed Miss Elizabeth's funeral due to him being in jail. He would plead guilty to the drug charges and was fined $1,000 and sentenced to 5 years of probation. The misdemeanor charges stemming from the domestic dispute a month before Elizabeth's death were eventually dropped after her passing. When the news broke of Miss Elizabeth's death, details were very fuzzy and many people rushed to the conclusion that Lex Luger murdered Miss Elizabeth. This conspiracy has haunted Luger till this day as he still gets fingers pointed at him for being the one who murdered Miss Elizabeth in a fit of rage. For many years, people have questioned the nature of Elizabeth's untimely demise. Much of this has stemmed from the shocking nature of her death. Elizabeth had been portrayed as an elegant, clean-living girl for nearly a decade on television, and the idea that she could die from a drug overdose was shocking to the public. As a result, some people have looked towards Luger as having done something to result in the death of Miss Elizabeth, as he was the only one who was there at the time when she passed away. Although it is unlikely that Luger had a direct hand in the death of Miss Elizabeth, he cannot totally be
How
absolved.
many felons are on the active roster right now? Felons? I don't fucking... A lot of people definitely cleaned up, too, in more recent years. On any show. Oh, any show? Oh, well, then that includes AEW. They're probably, half of them are probably... I'm fucking with you. I know a couple people... I'm aware of a couple people that have been arrested in the past couple years. You know? Bug shots. Apparently, Jey Uso is not allowed in Canada. It's either Jay or Jimmy. One of them can't go to fucking Canada.
From responsibility
for like DUI
and
shit.
demise. Luger was the one who first began to get Elizabeth addicted to the pills that would eventually take her life, and as seen by his eventual felony charges, he had a wide array of pills that Elizabeth had easy access to. The toxic spiral of their relationship, which featured physical abuse initiated by Luger, likely hastened Elizabeth's addiction and ultimate death. And had Luger been able to act faster or more competently when he discovered Elizabeth's state, there was a possibility
It's
that
not
he may
that
have
he's
been
not
able to
allowed in Japan, it's that he just does not want to go back. Because he just feels bad. He's like, I need to be invited back. It's like, yeah, well, they don't know you. The fucking Emperor of Japan doesn't know you. He's not going to say, oh, I want Logan Paul to come back to Japan. Like, no, bro. The only way that he would get invited to Japan is if there was a WWE event, which there was, but he decided not to go because again, he just does not want to go there again. He doesn't feel like he has the right to go back there.
Save her life. There's
Type
very
shit,
little evidence
which is respectable.
Killing Miss
However,
Elizabeth directly. But
it's
the case
crazy
can
that he even
certainly
did
be
that.
made that Lex Luger killed Miss Elizabeth indirectly. Luckily, Miss Elizabeth's
He did kill her indirectly. He gave her fucking drugs and she died.
legacy in the ring has far outweighed the tragic circumstances of her death. Rising from difficult circumstances, she became one of the most recognizable women in the entire industry. Her presence helped elevate the Macho Man to a legendary career, and the two were so intertwined that it can be argued that Randy Savage would never have become the superstar he did without the help of his wife and manager. Every person who talks about Elizabeth's time in the WWF does so with reverence, with many arguing that she should be part of the WWE Hall of Fame. Elizabeth paved the way for countless female valets after her, providing a blueprint for how a non-active member of the roster can still be a compelling
Rogan Parr is type of shit that is actually fucking crazy. I should time you out for 2 seconds.
Character and key figure in the industry.
Oh, it's time yourself out for 2 seconds.
As a result of addiction, the mark she left as the first lady of professional wrestling will never be forgotten. Lex Luger was accused of the murder of Miss Elizabeth, but he is not the only wrestler who has gotten accused of murder, as Jake the Snake Roberts' father, Grizzly Smith, was also accused of murdering his own daughter, Jolynn, because he was afraid that she would reveal how he essayed her and her siblings. If you'd like to see the video on Grizzly Smith, the predator who preyed.
That's kind of crazy. You stole my joke. You weren't even all I'm in. What? I don't tell jokes. I spit. I spit shit. I spit. Can't even time myself out. If you can't get timed out, how about I slime you out? Watch out on the 28th. Comprehensive Vince McMahon iceberg. I want to see the craziest fucking thing this man has done.